People go missing for 1,000 reasons, and most come with headlines. Tonight's stories started in the place most of us feel safest, our homes. 6 accounts where someone simply disappeared from inside their own house. True-style submissions, adapted for clarity. Don't listen alone. I don't know which part of that evening I'll remember for the rest of my life. Maybe it'll be the clink of ice in a glass, the small domestic noise that folds into the background when 2 people are comfortable in a house. Or maybe it'll be the sharp, clean silence when that noise ended. My wife, Jenna, had been working nights at a hospital for a while. That week she'd had a couple of short shifts, the kind that let her sleep more in the daytime. On the night she vanished, I'd gone to bed on the couch. She had a habit of falling asleep on the couch next to me sometimes. She liked the flicker of the late news. I remember the TV light on the ceiling and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, small domestic constancies. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I woke up to use the bathroom. The couch was empty. Jenna's mug sat on the coffee table where she'd left it, warm and half full. Half the room was lit by the LED strip on the back of the TV. When I walked into the bedroom, she hadn't come up the stairs. I checked the closet, the laundry she sometimes tossed on the chair, every place an obvious person would be. I didn't think for an instant to call someone. I thought she'd woken early and stepped into the yard to smoke, or she'd gone next door to the neighbors like she sometimes did. When I opened the back door, the yard was dark and still. The dog, our old, lazy hound, was in his bed and didn't respond to me. The streetlight outside hummed and washed the fence with a pale square. There were no footprints in the grass, no evidence of a midnight stroll. She was gone. I called her phone, straight to voicemail. I called her work. They said she hadn't come in that shift. I called our closest friends. No one had seen her. At 3 in the morning, I called the police. The dispatcher was calm, procedural. They said to wait 24 hours unless there were signs of foul play. 24 hours is a polite time to ask someone whose life is in your hands to wait. They came anyway an hour later because of my insistence. The officers were thorough. They checked the obvious things. The house, the car, it was in the driveway, the yard, the neighbors' cameras. The front porch camera showed me leaving for the store at 10 p.m., me returning at 10:18 p.m., the TV light visible in the window at 11:35 p.m., and then nothing else. No one had entered or left the property, it recorded. What we didn't have was a break-in, and that made everything worse. If someone had walked in the door, there would have been evidence. Scratches, the sound of jostled locks, a cut screen. There was none. The police taped the house and took statements. They asked the typical questions. Arguments? Enemies? Debts? We had no clear answers. We married each other for ordinary reasons. Coffee, bad jokes, the kind of comfortable days that don't make headlines. She had no known enemies, nobody who'd publicly threatened her. We checked medical records. No scheduled surgery, no forgotten appointment. I slept on the police station's bench that night because I could not make myself wander that house alone. The officers knocked on doors until day broke. Nothing. When they searched the house, they opened everything. Cabinets, crawlspaces, the attic. They had to bring in a K-9 team to check for scent paths. The dog was confused, trained mostly for drugs and explosives. It had little patience for domestic arsenals. The dog followed a trail from the couch to the bedroom door, then hesitated and sat. That part of the house had an odd smell, oil and old cloth, and the dog wouldn't move past it. It was like it decided not to push into a certain darkness. The thing that made my stomach liquefy was when an officer unzipped the mattress. It was stupid sounding now, after the way we'd all later explained things. But he'd supposed that maybe there was a body hidden in the mattress, or someone had jammed something into a folded blanket. He unzipped, and what spilled out was a small folded towel with a scrap of note pressed into it. She sleeps now. The paper was not in her handwriting. It was deliberate, careful, like someone who wanted to be seen but not found. That one small message made the skin all over my arms lift. We found other evidence over the next week. Bedding that had been shifted in the crawl space under her side of the bed. Threads of a sweater tucked deep into the base of the closet, fibers that matched a coat Jenna had thrown over a chair. The neighbors' Ring cameras gave glimpses of things that made no sense. A shadow at the edge of the driveway at 2:02 a.m., a small movement by the side gate at 2:09 a.m., and nothing else. 2 days into the search, our police sergeant, who was coordinating, called me in. He had a look of someone who has recovered a lost thing and then realized it's not quite the same object anymore. He told me there were 2 possibilities in his mind. Either Jenna had chosen to leave quietly and stage it something nobody close to her believed, or some stranger had entered the house and taken her. The sergeant preferred a third possibility and called it someone who'd been inside the house already. He asked me about remodels, about delivery men who'd opened a closet to store boxes, about contractors. He asked about the crawl spaces and ducts and the places people don't think to check. My responses were weak. I didn't have contractors. I had not had anyone sleep in my house. The idea made my skin cold. That a person could live quietly inside the structures of a home where a couple makes dinner and watches television, unnoticed for hours, maybe days. Weeks passed. The search turned outward to social media leads, ATM footage, cell towers. There were tenuous tips. One witness who swore she saw a woman matching Jenna's jacket on a bus at 3:30 a.m. An unfamiliar occurrence camera at a gas station recording someone with a similar posture in the wrong time zone. None of it stuck. In the end, the only piece of evidence that ever felt coherent was the scraped mark on the underside of the stairs leading to the basement, too low for a human to pass unless they curled in. The scratch marks looked old and deliberate, as if someone had used a tool to smooth a path or a hand to drag along in order to pull themselves through a narrow gap. The forensics team theorized that a slender person might have lived in the narrow space behind the walls or under the stairs. They said it was possible for a person with enough patience to wedge themselves into cavities and move at night. We moved from the house 2 months later because the police recommended us to get a new start, because friends couldn't sleep there, because every drawer opened whispered of absence. Sometimes at night, I still wake with the idea that Jenna's voice might come from the pipes or a hollow wall. The worst part is the idea that the house does not have to be breached. Sometimes it only needs to be occupied, in the places you refuse to think about. I keep a small lamp on the nightstand now wherever I sleep. It's stupid and simple. It does not get her back, but it is a thing I can do when the dark gets too patient. Some things leave you more questions than answers. I had all the typical new dad anxiety, sleeplessness, the fear you'll pick the wrong thing, wondering if you're enough. What I didn't bargain for was the kind of fear that resets the clock on everything you believed about safety. Our son, Milo, was 4 months old the night he disappeared. He'd been sleeping in the crib in our room for months. We'd read the safe sleep guidelines, made the room baby-friendly, and taken pride in the little rituals that felt like guardianship. A humidifier, a mobile that played the same song, a monitor that fed a tinny lullaby through the baby room app on my phone. That night I woke at 1:08 a.m. because the monitor cut out. The screen went black. Then the app reconnected with a distorted echo that sounded like someone breathing into the microphone. My first thought was a battery, a glitch. I padded into his room with the phone light on and the memory of late feedings still warm in my hands. The crib empty. The mattress was still slightly indented where he'd slept. The blanket lay folded at the footboard. I checked every obvious spot behind curtains, in the closet, under the bed. Nothing. The window was latched. The doors were closed. The only thing I noticed was a faint set of marks on the inside of the crib rails. Scratches, not deep enough to be violent but present enough that a fingernail might have made them. Panic makes you incompetent. For some reason I thought to check the crawl space. I pulled the access panel, my fingers remembered the small latch. The crawl space smelled of old cement and the heat of pipes. It was cramped. I could only fit half my torso through. The flashlight beam cut a small arc of dirt and insulation. My mind wanted to stop me from looking deeper. Against my better judgment, I lifted a piece of rotting wood and peered into the cavity. There, tucked between an old tangle of fabric and a nest of flattened insulation, was the softest, smallest handprint in the dust. Not the kind a child would leave from play. This print had pressure to it, like something had pressed something there gently and then lifted it away. And then a sound behind me, a soft laugh, like a child not yet cloaking a secret. I called the police. They examined the crib rails, the window seals, the monitor. They swabbed for prints and did the cursory neighborhood canvass. They could not say definitively whether someone had accessed the baby through a broken pipe or an open window or through the house's little cracks. But a neighbor's doorbell camera 2 streets over caught something around 1:13 a.m. A low silhouette moving along the fence line, small and almost hunched, like someone trying to stay invisible. The investigators postulated an unimaginable thought. A person maybe small-built, maybe someone who carefully became small had been living in some place of the house considered uninhabitable. The crawlspace, the attic, or even sewn into a wall cavity. Who knows how long they'd been there? Who knows whether they came out in the night while we slept and slipped the baby into a bag or simply carried him through the little gap under the door? The idea is a kind of horror that clips the edges off your reasoning and leaves only panic. We never found Milo. There were leads that fizzled into nothing. One sighting at a bus stop caught a fuzzy shape that could have been him. Another, an abandoned stroller found by a creek, but nothing that led us to a certain end. The case drifted into the unsolved files. I remember standing in the living room at 3 in the morning, the house silent and dumb, thinking of all the small places that weren't empty. I learned to see the house differently. As a structure with secret seams and small pockets, a body with arteries of vents and cracks that, if someone patient enough knew them, could allow intrusion without breaking. Sometimes, late at night now, I check under the furniture and listen for the faint press of breath. I have the monitor on full volume, and I sleep on the floor by the baby's old crib sometimes, because being awake is the only small defense. It's worthless logic in many ways, but it is action, and action is something to do when the world has rearranged itself. Missing can be simple, can also be deliberate. I'd been living in that house for almost 2 years. It had that cheap charm landlords love to advertise: hardwood floors, exposed brick, and the kind of small faults that let you know it's been lived in. The woman who disappeared, Maria, was a grad student and a friend. She left her things out so you could tell she'd been there. A mug on the counter, shoes by the door, the slow domestic evidence of someone who planned to return. She went to sleep on the couch around midnight and said she'd leave early in the morning for a seminar. Around 3 a.m., our motion-activated doorbell chimed. I was up because my insomnia has gotten theatrical. I peered at the feed, an empty porch and wet footprints that ended at the step. The camera recorded nothing else. I thought nothing of it and went back to bed. In the morning, she was gone. That's the pattern. One moment a presence, the next moment a space where presence once was. But what unsettled everyone was the phone. She had left her phone on the coffee table, unlocked, a half-typed message in the Notes app that read, "He's back." The timestamp stopped at 1:18 a.m. There were photos on her camera roll of the dining room pictures that made no sense. All of them taken from low angles as if from under furniture. One photo showed a darkened shape under our kitchen table that could have been a backpack. Another showed the hallway exposed, as if someone had been tracking our living space. We thought the normal things. Maybe she'd needed to step out and got roped into some impromptu errand. Maybe a friend took her. The problem with normal explanations is they can't hold the leak of other evidence. 2 days later, an old coat of hers was found on a mail bench at a thrift store 40 miles away, but the coat had an unfamiliar smear, an oily mark, and a tiny tear along the lining like something small had clawed at it. Her ID and wallet were found in their usual place at home. Her bank records showed no withdrawals, no activity. We had people go through the walls literally. A private security team drilled inspection holes and found a narrow, makeshift shelf behind the drywall of the hallway, lined with old receipts and a tiny plastic cup with 2 teaspoons stuck together. There was also a video camera, cheap and slicked with tape set to the narrow opening. The timestamps on the video were long and careful. Nights when someone walked the hallway. The person in the footage was dark and hunched and had a habit of pausing at the top of the stairs to listen. The creepiest small detail is the voice on the last recording we recovered. It's faint like a voice in another room, and it says, in a low voice, "She sleeps now. Keep her warm." It wasn't in Maria's voice. I can still hear the words when I close my eyes. The police kept us on the phone for months, and then the case cooled. We moved, because living in a house that recorded you sleeping felt like leaving your bedroom's walls recording your life. The camera footage is locked in a cold case file now, and sometimes when friends ask whether the house still has secrets, I say yes, because it does. Houses remember who leaves and who stays. They keep small records. Houses remember. Sometimes they keep people. I used to watch that man at the end of the cul-de-sac. He was a quiet sort, retired, kept to himself, and his truck was always parked perfectly centered in his driveway. When you live in a small neighborhood, you learn the rhythms of people like grooves in a record. He would take the trash out at the same time, sweep the porch every Sunday, and water his potted plants. One afternoon, he didn't show up at the mailbox. Another day passed. A week. Then police cars. He had vanished from his locked garage. It turned out he'd been in his garage when he disappeared. The door was jammed, and family members assumed he might have taken a nap. Weeks later, when they forced the door open, they had to cut it with a saw. They found tools, a radio, and a bed. It was like a small apartment, organized and ordinary, but the bed was made differently than anyone expected. Sheets folded tight and a small stack of index cards with names and times in neat handwriting. The part that didn't make sense to me was that the door was locked from the outside. That's the baffling detail that made every neighbor say the same two words. How? The man had a key and left it in his pocket. His body was not in the garage. There was no forced entry. The small, everyday things remained. The garage was set up like someone had been living there by choice or compulsion. Investigators found a narrow crawl space above the garage ceiling, insulated and dark, with footprints leading to a broken vent. The vent had been patched, but someone had been using it. The theory proposed to the family was that someone else had been living above or near the garage and came through a route no one noticed. The attic vents, the crawl spaces, a network of small seams that allow a patient person access. The neighbors were unsettled because our houses are older and full of those seams. Whoever it was could live between structures, move at night, and vanish into the fabric of the home. We started putting mirrors in our garages, checking attic panels, and even checking roofs. We all felt like we'd been given a map to places we preferred not to know. Sometimes the missing aren't taken, they move into the cracks. We were hosting Thanksgiving for a small group of 8 people around a wobbly table, and the house was full of the small, noisy life of cooking. The clatter of plates, the hiss of a turkey, the warm, low conversations. My sister, Elise, got up to use the bathroom and was gone. The house was familiar and secure. Windows latched, doors locked. We assumed she'd slipped into the backyard to call someone or smoke. No one saw her leave. The bathroom door was closed. We knocked. No answer. Eventually, we had to force the door open because she'd been inside for 5 minutes and still hadn't emerged. The bathroom, sterile and at odd angles, was empty. Towels folded. Cup on the sink. Her phone on the counter. Unlocked. Caller ID active. No missed calls. We called the police. They asked whether she had left of her own accord. The idea made the family sick. She was not the kind to bolt. She'd had a newborn 2 months earlier and rarely left aside. The initial sweep was frustrating because there was no sign of forced removal. The window was barred. The only strange thing they noted was the small gap under the bathtub panel where insulation had been moved and retucked like a crude blanket, like someone had been trying to make a small space. Later, when they pulled the tub panel, they found a small opening into a disused plumbing conduit too small for an adult normally, but the edges were worn. Someone small, or someone patient had been in there. They checked cameras. Nothing. They found evidence of movement in air vents. They found the faint outline of a handprint along the inside of the wall near the panel, like someone had been learning the shape of the house from the inside. She is still missing. Sometimes I think I can smell that shower steam late at night, and I go check, thinking maybe she's behind a panel, keeping herself small to survive. It feels ridiculous and necessary to do these checks. You do what you can. Not all disappearances are made in the open. A friend of mine, call him Nate, had a grandfather who built a house in the 1950s. Nate inherited it and kept it because of the way the house sat on the hill, the old maple in the front yard, the porch that sighs when the wind comes in. The house had been in the family for generations, and with that comes a kind of confidence in knowing its sounds. There was a period over 2 months when Nate's grandmother, older and forgetful, kept telling him that someone had been in the wall watching. She would get up in the night and say she felt eyes on the other side of the plaster. Nate joked with her, checked the windows, the locks. Then one night she disappeared. It was only at dawn when he noticed. The house showed no signs of forced entry. The old woman's bed was made tidily, her slippers beside it. On the kitchen counter lay her reading glasses, a cup half drunk, The only oddity was that the old radio that always played in the morning had been turned off. The house felt like it had swallowed her. Nate checked the obvious places first. Then after days, they called in a contractor to open the wall behind the grandmother's sewing room. He broke out a patch of plaster and shone his light into a narrow cavity. The contractor made a face you only see when your job crosses into something weird. Inside the void was a small nest of fabric and a pair of glasses old and bent, a small tin with coins, and a note that said, "We keep the house warm." The forensics profiler said it was the work of someone living in the cavity for a long time. Someone patient. Someone who'd had time to arrange their space in such a way that they could observe and not be observed. There were footprints, very small ones, on the rafters and the tiny smudges where someone had pressed their ear to the plaster. People asked what the motive could be. A number of theories floated. A family member hiding, a troubled soul who never left, a person too afraid to live in daylight. Whatever the case, the house had been hosting someone like a secret. The idea that a house of your house could hold a person in some of its internal spaces is what makes every other creak into a warning. Nate moved out. He left everything else, as if the house needed it to remember. The old radio still sits on a shelf, unplugged, like an altar to the idea that someone had been inside your walls all along. These were 6 true-style accounts of people who went missing from inside the places they called home. If you've experienced anything like this, if you found evidence of someone living where they shouldn't, email it to scaredalessenmend@gmail.com. Keep it neat and true style. We might read it. If you like this, please subscribe for more true scary stories. Good night.